My name is John Didi, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County and local political analyst. Welcome to the Maryland State Politics and Government podcast on Substack. Today, I am talking with delegate from the Fighting 46th District, Delegate Mark Edelson. Good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thanks so much. Great to be with you.
My first question is, how is session going so far?
Well, session is going great, particularly for me personally, because my wife and I welcomed our second child about 3 weeks ago. So that has been particularly beautiful and also quite hectic.
You're not
For
falling asleep during meetings, are you?
So far, I've been able to stay awake, due in part to the amount of caffeine intake I've been enjoying, but we're doing well. Wife and kid are healthy. Our oldest is doing well. So thank God everything is okay and everyone's good. But it has been quite a busy session. Yes.
What do you consider your goals for this session?
So for me, I would say this session, probably three most specific goals for the work that I'm doing. One, as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, it is always our goal to, and as you know, constitutional requirement to pass a balanced budget and ensure that it is one that makes the appropriate investments in our priorities, helping our most vulnerable, improving our transit system, which is a big thing for me, and our public transportation system, investing in our education system, all of the things that our budget needs to do. For me, more personally, I have a couple critical pieces of legislation that I'm hoping to get over the finish line. One, we actually just passed out of the House 30 minutes ago, which is the Transportation and Climate Alignment Act of 2026. And a couple other bills focused on the public transportation area. And then I also have a big sort of economic development package of bills that I'm focused on this session, particularly for my constituents in Baltimore City and helping to drive investment, housing, job opportunities into the city. And so those are probably the three focuses for me this session.
What do you consider the big issue the legislature is really having to deal with this year, the thing that people are really talking about?
It's a great question, and it's a question that sort of comes up every year. What I've noticed this is my fourth session now, is that as much as you want to try to focus on one big issue, there are so many things that we deal with over the 90 days. I would say for this session, certainly energy. Energy is a big issue for us, both dealing on how to lower costs for ratepayers, how to ensure that we are appropriately protecting our constituents from corporate attempts to, drive profit at their expense. Obviously, our public education system is always a huge focus for us. This session as well, dealing with the budgetary challenges that we have. We have a $1.5 billion deficit that we're looking to a gap that we're looking to close. And so, we've made a very clear commitment to Marylanders that we're not going to be raising taxes or fees to do that. So that really means two other options, right? That means moving money around from something that might not be needed immediately to something that is needed immediately. And then also cutting back on programs or maybe slowing growth in certain programs or projects. So those are probably three of the biggest issues. But then we also have to deal with the impacts of the federal government and the one big beautiful bill that I think many of us around here use a different title for, how that's going to impact Medicaid recipients, how that's going to impact local communities in terms of funding that has been cut. And so hard for me to sort of say one response. And then we also have to deal with the foreign policy impacts of what the federal government is doing and how that impacts our economy, how that impacts the labor market. We just got a briefing from the comptroller yesterday on the Board of Revenue's most recent estimates. And one of the things that they told us is everything is very fluid right now. They try to project out as much as they can what the revenues will look like for the next 6, 12, 18 months. But all of their projections come with a huge caveat that they are likely to change based on the unpredictable actions of the federal government. So sorry to not give you just one thing, but that's just how it is in session.
That's quite all right. The one thing I want to touch on in energy, it's kind of a two-part thing. The first part is with what's going on in Iran with the Strait of Hormuz and the way the state of Maryland does the gas tax. Isn't that going to bring more revenue into the state? Something maybe we really don't want in a way because of a war, but will that increase revenue?
It's possible. I mean, currently for the numbers that we have as of now, our gas tax attainment is down as a result of people driving more, fuel economic vehicles and hybrids and electric vehicles and things of that nature. But it is certainly possible that based on what is happening in Iran is going to increase gas tax revenue, but it's probably a little bit too early for me to necessarily prognosticate on that, other than to say it is possible.
Okay. The other question related to energy is, how do you feel about the issue of, as far as energy, maybe building another nuclear facility, opening up some of these plants that have been shut down, looking in that direction? Because there seems to be a lot of focus on solar, 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 which is a fine energy resource. Wind power, a fine energy resource. But sometimes you have to go back to what has also been done in the past that has worked fairly well. And with these soaring BG&E rates, there has to be some sort of a happy medium. How do you see perhaps looking at that as possible energy resources instead of kind of what has been looked at more recently?
Sure. It's a great question. I would say firstly, energy is a extremely complex subject. And there are a lot of different reasons why rates go up or down, and in-state versus out-of-state generation, et cetera. Some of the things that I think are clear is that, you know, data centers eat up a lot of energy, and AI takes up a lot of power, and a lot of power comes off the grid in order to handle that. And we have to figure out ways to deal with those challenges. I would say in the conversations that I have been privy to this session, there are a lot of options on the table as ways to deal with the amount of energy needs that we will have in the future, and nuclear is absolutely one of them.
One controversial issue that's come up recently, and I even testified about it, is the role of inspector generals. There's been a push to create a statewide inspector general. Legislation was actually defeated this week to allow Baltimore County to have the inspector general there control over the education system. And I'm wondering, do you feel that there should be a statewide inspector general to kind of watch over taxpayer money? And do you think inspector generals, people like Isabel Cumming, who people really trust, do you think she should be given the access she needs to do her work? She receive some more power to do those things?
Um, it's a good question. I would say it's difficult for me to necessarily opine on the statewide inspector general question because that legislation did not come before the committee that I'm on. So I haven't had the opportunity to necessarily weigh all the positives and negatives. As a lawyer, I always think that more oversight and scrutiny into these kinds of things is positive. As someone who sits on the House Appropriations Committee, I mean, so much of our job, we in our subcommittee sit in hours long budget hearings with every state agency poring over their budgets for the very purpose of ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent in their best and highest form and that there is no waste, fraud, and abuse. So I think, on the one hand, there is already a lot of that analysis that goes on at the state level. But in general, I would say I'm always someone who's in favor of sunlight being the best disinfectant. And so that's where I would usually lean on these issues.
So if they pass legislation that basically change that, I believe it's the uh, MAIP. I think I'm getting my acronyms definitely wrong. But if they would you support a change to basically return the power she had before to be able to do her investigations? Because right now she said she's at a standstill.
Yeah, I think it's MPIA
Yeah,
is
MPIA.
the acronym. You know, that's a tough one for me to respond to because I have not been privy to the legislative debates that have gone on in that question. So I'd have to probably look back at those testimonies and get back to you on that question, whether I would support that or not. In general, what I'd say is, um, as you know, session is so hectic and intensive, and it is impossible to sort of take an in-depth approach to every piece of legislation that comes out of every committee. And so you really have to trust the work that the committee and the committee leadership do. So should a bill of that nature come out of committee and come to the floor, I suspect it's likely that I would vote for it. But it's hard for me to give you a categorical response right now without having looked a bit more in detail into it.
I always ask political people this question, and it is, who do you consider your political heroes, North Stars, the people that you admired as a youth or currently admire that you kind of want to, as best as you can, follow their path?
So it's quite a lofty one, but I was born and raised in South Africa. I was born in 1984, and so I was 10 years old when Nelson Mandela was released from prison and ultimately elected president. And so I can remember as a young child, frankly, some of my formative memories being the end of apartheid and how much excitement and celebration there was in the country for that, and also fear of what the future would hold, and whether or not the country would be able to sort of remain any kind of a continued democratic experiment. And so I had the very unique opportunity of being able to watch him lead and bring the country together in such challenging times and bring people together of such different backgrounds and deeply different worldviews, to sort of stand together as South Africans and say we can forge a better future if we can do it together, and let's focus on the things that we agree on and not necessarily everything that has torn us apart. Even though all of those things need to be addressed, for the country to move forward, we have to come together as South Africans. And so I think for me, that's always been, I don't think I could ever stand up to the level of his leadership, but that notion specifically of bringing people together across the differences that we might have, in search of a better future for the constituents that we represent is definitely kind of the North Star of my political philosophy. And I'll say it's one of the things that I really enjoy about serving in the Maryland General Assembly, because you hear all these things about how things happen at the federal level and how much animosity there is and how much distrust and hatred there is among the two parties. And it's really not like that in Annapolis. We disagree deeply on issues of philosophy and how to solve the problems of our constituents. But there is a sincere level of respect among colleagues in Annapolis. Some of my closest friends are my Republican colleagues. And so I really love that is sort of the culture in Annapolis. And to me, that's the kind of leader and elected official that I would always aspire to want to be like.
Our next question deals with a controversial subject in this sense. Beer and wine sales in grocery stores. It's come up time and time again. It's gotten slapped down time and time again. There's arguments on both sides, that the small little mom and pop places keep worried about keeping them afloat. The grocery stores that, the Wegmanses and the Giants that bring in a lot of revenue. I grew up in New York State where they actually had an individual an aisle for beer and wine. It was a festival if you walked on that aisle. How do you feel about allowing some more grocery stores to be able to sell beer and wine and things like that?
That is candidly a really difficult one for me, because so when my family moved to the States, we moved to Atlanta. And in Georgia, it's similar to that, right? We would go to Kroger, we would go to Publix, and you can buy beer and wine in the grocery store, and it's very commonplace. And so that is sort of the background that I have in the States. But I also live in the 46th district, which is an area in which our local independent beer, wine, and liquor, bottle stores do an excellent job and are a critical part of our economy. And so I have a hard time seeing how this legislation wouldn't negatively impact them. But I also have family members reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I want to buy beer and wine in the grocery store. When are we going to pass this legislation?" So I think that my understanding is for this year, it's not going anywhere. The bill, my guess is it'll come back next year, and we'll see where the chips fall at that time.
Final question I want to ask is this. Governor gives you a red pen and says, here's what would you cross off the budget? What do you think needs to be changed as far as the budget where, we should be spending this. Well, how would you take a red pen?
Oh man. That's a tough one for me to do, especially this year, because I have had the opportunity now for 4 years to get pretty closely accustomed to the budget. And, I think most people who look at this stuff closely would tell you that this year the administration did a really good job of essentially cutting everywhere that they could possibly cut to still maintain programs that are doing good things for Marylanders, but try to make them as efficient and effective as possible. Um, I don't know that you could cut a whole lot more at this point. In fact, we're dealing with challenges of, money that was moved from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. There's a lot of advocates saying, look, that money was there for a particular purpose. You need to put that money back into that fund. But if you do, then you have to cut more from other general fund sources. I just walked by the rally from the Developmental Disabilities Administration, right? And they are on the cusp of a significant, I would say a cut in their growth, let's say, of their fund this year. And so if I was to say to you there are additional places that I would cut, I don't know that this year is a year that I could tell you, hey, this is something that I think we're doing that isn't working that we could just cut.
Okay, I want to thank you again for your time. I appreciate you taking the time and good luck the rest of the legislative session.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, John. Thanks for doing the work that you do.
Welcome.